Welcome to the Bedtime Tales, where every night brings a story to dream by. I'm your host, and tonight I'll be sharing The Whispering Maples, a tale woven from memory, quiet magic, and the courage it takes to remember what others have forgotten. In this story, you'll journey to a hidden orchard, an ancient place where every memory is carefully kept, and where a single lantern glows against the darkness. There, a woman named Eliza Thistlewhite will discover that to remember is not only an act of love, but sometimes an act of defiance. So settle in, let the hush of evening surround you, and listen closely, because here on the Bedtime Tales, no story is ever truly lost.
In the quiet village of Maplewick, tucked between rolling hills and ancient woods, there stood a small stone cottage. Every evening, as the sky melted into pink and gold, a slender trail of chimney smoke rose above the mossy roof, curling into the twilight like a beckoning finger. The cottage belonged to Mrs. Eliza Thistlewhite, a woman of 73 years, whose spectacles always hung from a ribbon around her neck and whose eyes never lost their mischievous sparkle. Some said she was simply a retired schoolmistress. Others whispered she was a collector of curious secrets, the sort that danced just out of sight if you tried to look too closely. Behind the cottage, the woods spread like a dark green sea, the whispering maples. Children were warned not to stray too far, for strange stories drifted out of those trees. Sometimes, on still nights, you could hear murmured voices, a lilting, unearthly language that only the wind understood. One evening in early September, Eliza brewed a pot of chamomile tea and sat by her window. She watched the last golden rays spill over the brambles at the forest's edge. The hush that followed dusk felt deeper than usual, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. And that was when she saw him, a boy no older than 12, wearing a patched woolen coat, standing perfectly still among the shadows. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, and his gaze met hers with a solemn curiosity. Eliza's heart gave a curious little leap. She set her teacup down and went to the door, her old bones protesting with each step. When she reached the threshold, the boy was gone. Only the maples remained, whispering secrets to the moon. In the following days, Eliza thought often of the boy. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him in the corner of her eye, flitting between trunks. The villagers claimed no child had gone missing. On the third evening, as twilight folded itself over the village, she heard a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, he was standing there, pale and silent. She offered him a seat by the fire and a cup of tea. He did not speak, but when he finally looked up, she noticed that his eyes were the color of old smoke, and in their depths she saw something ancient and sorrowful. He held out a small brass lantern, its glass cracked, the wick unlit. Eliza reached for it carefully. The lantern felt oddly warm in her hands. She looked at the boy, but before she could ask his name, he spoke in a voice as thin as moth wings. "It's nearly time." Then he turned and slipped into the darkness beyond her threshold, leaving her with the lantern and 1,000 questions. The next morning, she rose before dawn. The brass lantern stood on her table, faintly glowing though no flame burned inside it. She wrapped it in a cloth, tucked it into her basket, and set out along the narrow path that led into the whispering maples. At the edge of the woods, she hesitated. The air felt different, heavier somehow, scented with damp leaves and old secrets. She tightened her shawl and stepped beneath the trees. She walked for hours, though it felt like no time at all. The path wound deeper among the trunks until she came to a clearing she did not remember ever seeing. In the center stood an ancient maple tree, its trunk so wide it would have taken 10 people to encircle it with joined hands. Its branches arched overhead, forming a kind of living cathedral. The boy stood beside it, waiting. "You came?" he said simply. Eliza nodded, too winded to answer. She set down her basket. "Who are you?" she managed finally. "My name is Ash," he replied. "And you are the one who remembers." She frowned. "Remembers what?" But he only gestured to the lantern. "You must light it before the sun sets. If you don't, the orchard will wake." "What orchard?" she demanded. But Ash was already stepping back among the roots, fading into the shadows. She was alone. Eliza turned the lantern in her hands. The brass was etched with symbols she did not know. She thought perhaps she ought to leave it there and go home, but something in the hush of the clearing made her stay. She struck a match and touched it to the wick. For a moment nothing happened. Then a soft golden glow unfurled, pushing back the gloom. At the edge of the clearing, a narrow door appeared among the roots, outlined in pale light. She took a breath. "Well," she whispered, "I suppose we shall see what there is to see." And she stepped through. Inside, a corridor of braided roots led down into the earth. The walls shimmered faintly as though lit by hidden fireflies. She walked slowly, the lantern casting a pool of warm light around her. At last, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling arched so high it vanished in darkness. Along the walls, countless small niches held objects. A lock of hair tied with ribbon, a broken clay cup, a yellowed letter sealed in wax. In the center of the floor was a mosaic of a great tree with silver leaves. A voice echoed in the chamber, low and resonant. "Welcome, Eliza Thistlewhite." She started, lifting the lantern high. The boy emerged from the shadows. But he was not a boy now, he was older, his face lined with years. She took a step back, heart hammering. "Ash." He inclined his head. "Time is different here." She swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "Why have you brought me?" He gestured around them. "These are the memories that feed the orchard. Each is a story left behind." "Why me?" she demanded. His gaze met hers with something like sadness. "Because you are the one who remembers when others forget." Eliza felt her throat tighten. She looked around at all the small tokens of lives she would never know. "What is this place really?" she asked. Ash stepped closer, and the lantern's light glimmered over the sorrow in his eyes. "It is the heart of the orchard, the place where all that is traded is kept. Every memory, every secret, every regret." A cold shiver traveled down her spine. "People trade their memories?" "Yes," he said softly. "For a wish, for knowledge, for freedom. But nothing comes without cost." Eliza glanced down at the lantern. "And what happens if the lantern goes out?" "The orchard wakes," he whispered. "It stretches beyond these trees. It grows hungry." She turned in a slow circle, the hair prickling on her arms. "Then why show me this?" Ash's expression flickered. "Because you have a choice. You can leave now and forget all of this. Or you can stay and guard it as I have." "You?" Her voice cracked. "You were just a boy, once," he agreed. "A very long time ago." He touched her shoulder gently. "The orchard has many roots. It feeds on forgetting. But it can be held in check if someone is willing to remember." She drew a slow breath, her heart unsteady. "And if I leave?" His gaze drifted to the walls. "Then in time the orchard will swallow everything. And no one will know why." She looked around at the tokens again, the lock of hair, the letter, the cup, and felt a strange ache in her chest. "I can't decide now," she said finally. "Then you have until dawn," Ash told her. "After that, the orchard decides for you." The lantern flickered. She tightened her grip on the handle. "I need to think." He inclined his head. "I will wait." Eliza turned and walked back up the tunnel, the lantern's glow illuminating faces carved into the roots. Faces she hadn't noticed before, watching her with blank eyes. When she emerged into the clearing, the sky was dark. The maples sighed in the wind, their leaves whispering words she almost understood. She returned to her cottage, though she didn't remember the walk. She set the lantern on her bedside table and lay down fully dressed, staring at the ceiling until sleep claimed her. Dreams came, vivid and unsettling. She saw the orchard spreading under the village, its roots winding through cellars and foundations, tapping at doors. She saw people opening those doors and handing over small, shining things, their happiest moments, their names, their loves. She saw herself standing at the edge of the clearing, holding the lantern high while the trees pressed close. When she woke, it was still dark and the lantern's glow was fading. Heart hammering, she rose and snatched it up. She stumbled to the door and flung it open. The boy was waiting on the path. His face was young again. "It's time," he said quietly. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered. "No one ever is." He reached out and she felt his cold fingers close over hers. Together they turned toward the woods. The path unrolled before them like a ribbon. She felt no fear, only an aching sadness for all that was forgotten and all that might yet be lost. They reached the clearing and she set the lantern on a flat stone. Its glow was no brighter than a dying coal. "If you stay," Ash said, "you will remember everything, even the things that hurt." She looked up at the great tree, the roots coiling through the earth like 1,000 sleeping snakes. "And if I go, you will forget, and the orchard will grow." She closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw her grandmother's face, her father's laugh, the smell of warm bread on a winter morning. She saw the girl she had been and the woman she had become. "I will stay," she whispered. Ash's smile was both sad and relieved. "Then it is done." The lantern flared, filling the clearing with gold. For an instant, she saw every memory that had ever been traded, so many lives woven together in a single, trembling tapestry. Then the light settled around her, warm and heavy, and she knew she would never again forget. When she looked for Ash, he was gone. She stood alone beneath the great tree, the lantern burning steadily at her feet. And far away in the sleeping village, no one stirred. No one dreamed of the orchard or its hunger. Only Eliza remained to remember. Only she heard the trees whisper her name. Time passed differently in the orchard. Sometimes a moment felt like a year. Sometimes an hour passed in a blink. She wandered the glades and tunnels, learning the names of every token, every story. When she grew tired, she rested against the ancient roots, and they cradled her like a child. Sometimes she wept for all that was lost, but more often she felt a quiet gladness to keep it safe. Seasons turned overhead, unseen. She began to forget her old life, the cottage, the village, her own reflection. But she never forgot the memories entrusted to her care. One night, as she was mending a broken niche, she heard a voice she had not heard in what felt like centuries. "Eliza." She turned. Ash was there, older and taller, but still with the same solemn eyes. "You're here?" she breathed. He nodded. "I could not go far." She set aside her work. "I thought I was alone." "You are never alone," he said gently. "We are all here." He gestured, and she realized that countless figures stood among the roots, men, women, children, all watching her with soft eyes. "Who are they?" she asked. "The ones who remembered before you," Ash said, "and the ones who will remember after." She felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Will I ever see my old life again?" He hesitated. "In dreams, perhaps." She closed her eyes. "Then that is enough." The lantern at her feet brightened. All around her, the orchard sighed, a sound like wind through hollow bones, and something else. Gratitude. Well, she opened her eyes to the darkness and lifted the lantern high. Its light stretched into every corner, illuminating every secret. And for the first time she did not feel afraid. The orchard knew her. She knew it in return. And together they waited for whoever would come next, bearing a memory too heavy to keep. Years might have passed, or only hours, she could no longer tell. But on a night when the sky was black as ink, she felt a stirring in the roots beneath her feet. The lantern glowed brighter, and the air seemed to tremble with expectation. A figure stepped from between the trees. For a moment she thought it was Ash returning. But this one was taller, older, wrapped in a long coat that fluttered like wings. He paused just inside the clearing, eyes fixed on her. "I've come for what was taken," he said, voice low and ragged. She felt the orchard recoil around her, as though the trees themselves recognized a threat. "Who are you?" she asked, her own voice steady though her hands trembled. The man lifted a gloved hand. "Once I was called the Gatherer." The name fell into the clearing like a stone into a still pond. Memories rippled in its wake, stories of a man who had traded not one memory but thousands, until he was hollow as a gourd. "You were banished," she said, remembering now, an old tale whispered by Ash in the long watches of the night. "I found my way back," he replied, and his mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "This orchard belongs to no one." He stepped closer and the lantern guttered. "You cannot have them," she said, lifting the light higher. "They are not yours." The Gatherer spread his hands. "Everything forgotten belongs to me." Roots rose from the earth, twisting toward him like serpents. But he only laughed, a hollow, scraping sound. "You cannot keep them all, old woman." He reached into his coat and drew out a shard of black glass. The lantern flared as though in pain. Around them the orchard groaned. "If you break it," she said, her heart thundering, "they will be lost forever." "Better lost than locked away," he hissed. She felt the orchard's fear pulsing through her bones. She took a step forward, lantern raised. "Leave this place." But the gatherer only lifted the shard higher. Shadows poured from it like ink in water. They rushed across the clearing, swallowing the lantern's glow. She felt the memories straining within her, crying out to be free. She clenched her teeth, trying to hold them close, but they slipped through her grasp one by one. She thought she heard Ash's voice calling her name, distant and desperate. Then everything went dark. When she woke, she was lying on the cold earth. The lantern was gone. Around her, the orchard shivered in the darkness. A single figure knelt nearby, Ash, his face pale with grief. "He took them," she whispered, her throat raw. "Not all," Ash said. He reached for her hand. "He cannot carry what he cannot understand." She looked into the shadows and felt the emptiness where so many stories had once been. Tears burned her eyes. "What do we do?" she asked. Ash's fingers tightened around hers. "We begin again." In the days that followed, if days they were, she kept watch at the edge of the clearing, lantern newly kindled, though its glow was dimmer than before. She waited for the gatherer to return. She waited for Ash to fade as he sometimes did. She waited for the orchard to heal. And in that waiting, she learned something she had never quite understood in all her long years. To remember is an act of defiance. To care for what others discard is a kind of love. One evening, though perhaps it was morning, she heard footsteps on the path. A young woman stepped into the clearing, her dark hair streaked with silver, her eyes wide with wonder. She held a folded letter in trembling hands. "Is this the place?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Eliza nodded. "It is." The woman's gaze flicked to the lantern. "I was told that if I brought a memory here, it could be kept safe." "Yes," Eliza said gently. "If you wish." The woman pressed the letter to her chest. "I can't bear to forget him. But it hurts too much to remember." Eliza's heart ached with understanding. She held out her hand. "Then let me carry it with you." The woman hesitated. Then she stepped forward and placed the letter in Eliza's palm. The lantern flared and the orchard sighed. Somewhere among the roots, she felt the presence of every keeper who had come before her, felt them lending her strength. She knew then that she was never truly alone, and that as long as even one person remained to remember, the orchard could never be conquered. In the years that followed, many came to the clearing. Some brought tokens. Some came only to listen. A few left lighter than they had arrived. None ever left unchanged. And all the while, the lantern burned on, a small, stubborn light in the darkness, illuminating every story worth keeping. There were nights when the orchard grew restless. The branches shifted and sighed, and the roots quivered with uneasy dreams. On those nights, Eliza sat by the great tree, lantern in her lap, whispering names she had learned by heart. She recited them like a litany, each syllable an anchor to keep the darkness at bay. "Jonas," she would murmur. "Miriam, Etzel, Lark." And with every name, the orchard stilled, as if reassured that someone still cared enough to remember. Sometimes Ash appeared beside her, no longer a child or an old man but something in between. She never questioned how he changed. Here, time was only a suggestion. "Do you ever regret staying?" she asked him once, when the trees were quiet and the air smelled of frost. Ash tilted his head, considering. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I wonder what my life might have been if I'd walked away." "And do you wish you had?" He shook his head. "No. Because then no one would have been here to meet you." She smiled faintly, though her chest tightened with a longing she couldn't quite name. "I suppose that makes us both fools." "Perhaps," Ash said softly. "But even fools have their purpose." Once, during a night so long she thought dawn might never come, she saw the gatherer again. He stood beyond the clearing, watching her with eyes like polished stone. He did not cross the threshold. He only raised a hand as if in greeting or warning, and then slipped back into the dark. She felt his hunger lingering long after he vanished, a cold pressure at the edge of her thoughts. But the lantern did not falter. And she knew then that as long as she remained, he could never reclaim what he had lost. She began to teach the newcomers who found their way to the orchard. She showed them how to place a memory safely among the roots, how to speak the names aloud so they would not fade. Some stayed for only an hour, weeping with relief. Others lingered for days, learning the quiet rituals that kept the orchard alive. Each time someone departed, she felt the ache of parting. But she also felt a small pride, knowing the burden she carried was now shared. One evening, she noticed a boy standing shyly just beyond the tree's shadow. He looked no older than 10, his cheeks pink with cold. In his hands he held a wooden toy soldier, its paint worn smooth by years of touch. She beckoned him closer, and he hesitated before stepping into the lantern's glow. "Who gave that to you?" she asked gently. His voice was small. "My brother. Do you wish to forget?" The boy looked down. "No, I want to remember, but it hurts." She reached out and closed her hand around his. "Then let me keep part of it safe so the rest won't feel so heavy." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. Together they placed the toy soldier in a hollow among the roots. When the bark closed over it, the boy let out a long breath as if he'd been holding it for years. She watched him leave, feeling the orchard settle around her like a blanket. In moments like this, she understood why she had stayed, why Ash had waited, why so many before them had chosen the same path. Because in a world where so much was lost, to remember was the greatest kindness of all. When she was alone again, she sat beneath the tree and closed her eyes. She let the memories wash over her, the voices, the faces, the fleeting joys and sorrows. They were a burden, yes, but they were also a gift, and she would carry them for as long as she was able. The days and nights blurred together. Sometimes she forgot her own name. Sometimes she remembered too clearly. But always she kept the lantern burning. And always she listened to the whispering of the maples, a chorus of all the lives that had ever passed through their shadows. In the end, and she knew somehow that it was the end, she felt a hand on her shoulder. When she opened her eyes, Ash was standing there. He looked just as he had on the first night they met, a boy with solemn eyes and a lantern of his own. "It's time," he said softly. She nodded, her heart calm. "Will someone come after me?" "Yes," Ash promised. "There is always someone." She rose, feeling lighter than she had in years. Together they turned toward the path that led deeper into the orchard. The lantern's light danced across the roots, illuminating every memory she had ever kept safe. She did not look back. She did not need to. The orchard would remember for her now. And somewhere beyond the trees, a new light began to glow, waiting to guide the next soul who dared to care enough to remember. Far beyond the clearing, past the gnarled trunks and twisting tunnels, a young woman paused on a narrow trail. Her name was Mira, and she had been searching for something she could not quite name, only a feeling that somewhere in the world a place waited for her. She carried no lantern, no tokens. Only a small locket on a silver chain that pressed warm against her collarbone when she thought of her mother's voice. When she first heard the whispers, she thought it was the wind. But as she drew closer, she realized they were words, soft as breath, beckoning her forward. She stepped beneath the canopy, and the air thickened, golden motes swirling around her face. She felt no fear, only a quiet certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The path widened into a clearing unlike any she'd ever seen. At its center stood a single tree, vast and ancient, its roots spreading in every direction. A lantern hung among its branches, shining steadily through the gloom. Beneath it, a figure waited, a woman with hair silver as frost, her face lined but kind, her hands folded neatly at her waist. Mira hesitated at the edge of the light. The woman inclined her head as though she'd been expecting her all along. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft but clear. I don't know why I'm here," Mira admitted. The woman smiled faintly. "Few ever do." Mira touched the locket at her throat. "I keep thinking, if I leave it here, I won't have to carry the sadness anymore. But then I think I'll lose her completely." The woman nodded, her gaze never wavering. Love does not vanish when we set down our grief. It only changes shape. Mira felt tears sting her eyes. Do you promise? I do. The woman stepped aside, gesturing toward the hollow at the base of the great tree. If you are ready. Myra's fingers trembled as she unclasped the chain. For a moment she almost tucked it back into her blouse. But then she thought of her mother's laughter, the way her hands smelled of flower and lavender. She pressed the locket to her lips, whispering a single word she could not bear to say aloud. And then she placed it in the hollow. As the bark closed over it, the lantern above them flared brighter. Mira felt something lift from her chest, leaving an ache so deep it felt like relief. When she looked up, the woman was watching her with a kind of quiet pride. Thank you, Mira whispered. Thank you for keeping her safe. It is my honor, the woman replied. Mira glanced back at the dark trees. Will I forget her? No, the woman said softly. You will remember what matters. Mira drew a shaky breath. Then I think I can go. The woman nodded. Go gently. As Mira turned to leave, she felt the woman's hand brush her shoulder, a touch so full of understanding it nearly broke her heart. She did not look back as she stepped onto the path. She knew the orchard would remember her mother's laughter, even when she no longer could. When the girl was gone, the woman, whose name was now Keeper, lifted her face to the lantern's glow. Around her, the orchard stirred, roots and branches shifting as though in a great sigh. She closed her eyes and felt every memory she carried settle into place, a vast and patient archive of love and loss. She did not know how long she would remain. Perhaps until the orchard found someone else. Perhaps forever. But for now it was enough simply to be here. To listen. To remember. At the clearing's edge, a voice spoke, low and familiar. You've done well. She turned, unsurprised to see Ash standing there, lantern in his hand. His eyes were bright, neither old nor young. Will it ever be finished? She asked. He shook his head, smiling sadly. Not while there are hearts that love and minds that forget. She nodded. Then I will wait. And so will I, Ash said. Side by side, they watched the darkness beyond the clearing. The orchard's whispers rose and fell around them, a music as old as sorrow, as enduring as hope. And far away beyond the last of the maples, the world carried on, never knowing that in a hidden glade, a light was kept burning and every forgotten story waited to be remembered again. Long after Mira had disappeared between the trees, the keeper remained beneath the lantern's glow. She felt the locket's memory settle among the countless others, a delicate thread woven into the orchard's vast tapestry. Though her hands were still, her mind was full, echoes of Myra's mother's laughter, the warm press of her cheek against the child's hair, the scent of lavender that would never fade. The orchard stirred as though tasting this new addition. The roots flexed and coiled beneath the soil, reaching a little farther into the dark places of the world. The keeper pressed her palm to the great tree's trunk and whispered the mother's name, so it would not slip away unseen. As dawn bled into the clearing, she noticed Ash standing at the edge of the lantern's light. His gaze was thoughtful, and his lantern cast a long, wavering shadow behind him. She was brave, he murmured. They all are, the keeper replied softly. Ash stepped closer, his face solemn. The orchard grows restless again. I can feel it in the roots. She nodded. I feel it too. Each memory is a salve, but also a weight. He tilted his head, studying her. Do you ever wonder how many more will come? She did not answer at once. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened to the countless voices whispering through the leaves, every story entrusted to their keeping. When the last memory is placed, she said at last, perhaps the orchard will sleep. Ash looked unconvinced. Or perhaps it will hunger all the more. They stood together in silence, watching the light rise over the trees. The keeper wondered, if the orchard did hunger beyond all sating, would she still have the strength to remain? It was on an evening of pale rain that the next visitor arrived. The keeper sensed him before she saw him, a thin ripple of loneliness moving through the orchard. She emerged from her small shelter of woven roots to find a child standing by the tree, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held nothing in his hands, no token to offer. but his wide eyes were filled with such mute sorrow that she felt her heart contract. "What have you come to leave behind?" she asked gently. The boy shook his head. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. She set her lantern down on the flat stone. "What is your name?" Again he only looked at her with a desperate pleading she did not fully understand. The orchard stirred restlessly, and she felt a prickle of unease. Ash appeared at her shoulder, his voice low. "He carries nothing." "He must have something," she whispered. "No," Ash said with the sadness of certain knowledge. "He is the memory." A cold shiver passed over her. She knelt before the boy and reached out, brushing her fingers along the fragile line of his jaw. In that instant, a torrent of impressions flooded her mind. A cradle, a woman's tears, a name never spoken, a tiny heartbeat that had stopped before it could echo in the world. "Oh," she breathed, "you were never remembered." The boy pressed his small hand over hers, and she felt the orchard hold its breath. "I will remember," she promised. She took him gently by the shoulders and guided him to the hollow in the tree. As she laid her hand on the bark, it opened without a sound. She closed her eyes and spoke the name she felt, though it had never been given voice. When the hollow sealed, the boy was gone. Ash touched her arm, his eyes luminous. "You have given him a place." Tears slid down her cheeks. "Then he will never be forgotten." Seasons blurred into one another, marked only by the waning glow of the keeper's lantern. Each memory placed within the roots seemed to dim its light a little more. One night, as the wind howled through the maples and the orchard shifted restlessly in the dark, the keeper felt her strength falter. She sat beneath the great tree, the lantern cradled in her lap, and tried to remember her own beginning, her cottage, the village, the girl she had been. But those shapes were growing pale, like old ink washed by rain. Ash appeared beside her, his presence a steadying weight. "You have carried more than any before you," he said quietly. She met his gaze, seeing her own sorrow mirrored there. "And still it is not enough." "No," Ash crouched, his lantern flickering. "But it has never been about enough. Only about the trying." Her hands tightened around the lantern's handle. "I fear the day I forget it all." Ash reached out and laid his palm over hers. "When that day comes, someone will remember you, as you remembered them." She tried to smile, though her throat was tight. "And if no one comes?" Ash's expression softened. "Then the orchard will hold your memory itself." In the hush that followed, the orchard sighed, branches creaking overhead. The keeper closed her eyes and felt that living archive press around her like an embrace. She was no longer afraid. When she opened her eyes again, dawn was breaking. The lantern still glowed, frail but unextinguished. She knew she would stay a little longer. However long the orchard needed her.